There has been a lot of talk in the baseball community of traditional versus new stats centered around the National League Cy Young Award race, an honor to award the best pitcher in each league. With all due respect to Aaron Nola, the race has been, for the entirety of the season, between Jacob deGrom of the New York Mets and Max Scherzer of the Washington Nationals. These two players perfectly exemplify this argument of traditional versus new stats. All we have to do is look. I've outlined 8 stats, 4 traditional and 4 new, and I've listed who is better in the stat between the two of them. The asterisk denotes if the pitcher led the National League in that stat. If you just look at these 8 stats, these two pitchers are clearly the best in the league. You can also see that, with the exception of ERA, Scherzer is backed by the traditional stats, and deGrom the newer ones. Even so recent as 10 years ago, Scherzer would have been the hands-down winner of the Cy Young Award. deGrom wouldn't have even been in the conversation. Now, the winner has not been announced as of when I'm recording this video, but deGrom is by far favored to win the award, and probably will. If he does, he'll have the worst record of any starting pitcher to win the award in history. But his record had more to do with the amount of run support he was getting, and less to do with his pitching ability. He had a great season, his stats supported that, and most importantly, the voters saw those stats. 10 years ago, voters would have looked at that horrible record and passed him up as a nobody, but instead, he's a Cy Young Award favorite, because of how dominant he's been in these new stats. This means new stats are becoming more prevalent and valuable to professionals in determining worth of a pitcher, but we should now ask the question, which of these is more valuable in determining the worth of the pitcher, traditional or new stats? In order to answer this question, we need to first understand the 8 stats we will be using. Wins is one of the oldest pitching stats and used to be extremely important for pitcher value. For a starting pitcher to obtain a win, he must pitch at least 5 complete innings and be the last one to have pitched for his team before they take the lead for good. As I said, this used to be a very important and used stat. A good pitcher would win 20 plus games, and if you didn't, you weren't even considered for the award. However, today we realize that this stat doesn't really determine how good a pitcher is. A pitcher could be terrible, but with a good offense, he could win games. ERA, or earned run average, seeks to determine if the pitcher were to pitch all 9 innings of a game every time he pitched, on average, how many runs he would allow. It only accounts for earned runs, so errors are taken out of consideration. However, this doesn't completely take out of consideration a bad defense, as defensive mishaps that aren't errors are still used in this stat. Strikeouts are one of the most popular stats, as they are very fun to watch and generally hard to come by. Almost anybody, even somebody who knows next to nothing about baseball, has heard of a strikeout, but not many people know how one is obtained. A pitcher gets a strikeout when the batter gets 3 strikes on them before they get 4 balls. There are 2 ways to get a strike. If the batter swings and misses at a pitch, they get a strike. If the batter doesn't swing, but the ball is in the strike zone, they get a strike. While the strike zone may vary between umpires, it is generally between the batter's chest and knees and between either edge of home plate. WHIP doesn't mean that thing that Indiana Jones uses. It actually stands for walks and hits per innings pitched. It measures, on average, how many batters reach base each inning a pitcher pitches. The lower the WHIP, the better a pitcher keeps runners off the base paths. This is generally very useful, as a pitcher who doesn't let up a lot of runners won't let up a lot of home runs. However, a pitcher who let up a lot of home runs, which would make him less effective, but may not make his WHIP as high. However, this is unlikely, and realistically, WHIP seems helpful until you realize it's just a byproduct of other statistics. If a pitcher has a good ERA, it's almost guaranteed that he will have a good WHIP, making the stat seem redundant. ERA plus, or adjusted ERA, is, in the simplest terms, a pitcher's ERA adjusted for ballpark factor. An ERA plus of 100 is considered average. Anything above this is considered above average, and anything below is considered below average. This stat levels the playing field between all pitchers so as to compare them evenly. FIP stands for Fielding Independent Pitching. This stat is supposed to take out of consideration the events a pitcher has limited control over, balls hit into the play of field. Because there are many different factors that could occur when a ball is hit in play, factors that the pitcher has no control over, fielding error, throwing error, misreading a fly ball, fielder being out of position, miscommunication, overall bad fielding. Oftentimes, stats that leave these factors in consideration are not as effective in determining how good a pitcher was. However, a pitcher with a great defense would get more help than one with an average defense. So this stat levels the playing field by focusing on one-on-one interactions with the batter. However, this stat could be extremely flawed, as a pitcher who lets up a lot of hits wouldn't be very effective, but this stat wouldn't show that. WAR, and I don't mean the kind with tanks and guns, stands for wins above replacement. What this stat is supposed to determine is how many more wins a player is worth than a replacement player at his same position, or his wins above replacement. A pitcher with a WAR of 0 or lower is considered to be replaceable, and the higher the WAR, the less replaceable he is. This stat aims to determine the overall value a player has for his team. The final stat I researched was RE24, or run expectancy based on the 24 base out states. It may look like some random computer code, but it's actually a very well thought out and somewhat complicated stat. It is basically, if given a certain scenario based on the number of outs there are, how many runners are on base, and where those runners are, the estimated amount of runs that will score that inning. It would likely be very useful, but is nowhere near mainstream, has little research dedicated towards it, so non-baseball experts have little idea on how to properly use the information given to them through this stat. So, what is the answer to this compelling question? Which is really more useful, traditional or new? Well, it's entirely up to you. There's a whole world of statistics out there, and you get to decide which you believe are the most relevant. Personally, I believe that new stats are the stats of the future, and pretty soon the baseball world will feel the same way. However, that doesn't mean we should disregard the traditional stats on which the game is grounded. You need a mix of everything, and you should never rely on one stat. Strikeouts are very useful to determine how dominant a pitcher is, but pitchers with high strikeout rates often have difficulty keeping runners off the base paths. ERA does a wonderful job of seeing how well a pitcher obtains his main goal, to keep runners from scoring, but does nothing to account for outside factors, such as where he is pitching. A pitcher could be the best to ever play, but if he played for the Rockies in Colorado, his ERA would show a very different story. WAR is a great statistic and my personal favorite stat to determine pitcher value, but it is completely context neutral and by itself can be misused and misinterpreted. No one stat is perfect, and there never will be a perfect stat. We need to use as many stats as we can to get an overarching idea of how effective a pitcher is. Baseball statistics is a progressing topic, and newer and better stats are being thought up all the time. As I said, it's up to you to decide what you want to use, but if you truly want to determine the most effective pitcher, don't just look at the stats. Statistics can only show the mathematical side of the game, but the human aspect, I would argue, is even more important. Watch them pitch, read articles about them, learn things about the player that a number can't tell you. In doing this, combined with a healthy mix of traditional and new stats, you can find your Cy Young Award winner.